Good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me online as well. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending this event. My name is Matteo Galizzi from the LSE, and I'm the chair of the LSE Open Research Working Group and the local network of the UK Reproducibility Network. I really welcome you all to the event. Just a couple of things on housekeeping. There is no fire test scheduled for today, and in event of a fire, there is an assembly point outside Lincoln Inn Fields, building CKK. We ask you to kindly switch your mobile phone on silent. And the reason is also that we are going to record this event, and we're going to share the event after. And the format of the event is that we will briefly introduce the event. We will introduce the speakers. Each speaker will talk for around 5 minutes each, and then we will open up for questions. And we are aiming to finish by 5 minutes to 11. Okay. Thank you very much, and I'll pass it to the other chair of the event.
Yeah, thank you so much, Matteo. I also would like to extend a very warm welcome to everyone here in the room and online. I think here, so you can see where the voice is coming from. My name is Sandy Schumann. I'm a lecturer in security crime science at UCL, and I'm also UCL's local chapter co-lead of the UK Reproducibility Network, bit of a mouthful. I'm very excited that you all joined us here for this session today on qualitative research and reproducibility. And this event is part of the Open Science and Scholarship Festival, which is a very unique initiative because it's the first time that 3 London institutions, so LSE, UCL, and Francis Crick Institute, have come together to promote open science. At the end of the session, we'll have a slide with a QR code where you can also see the rest of the program. There are other events that you can attend this week. For now, though, I want to thank actually the Open Science Services, Open Research Services team, here at LSE for organizing all of this. And yeah, thank you also to you, Matteo, for hosting us at LSE to run this event. To keep with our tight timeline, I'll hand back to you to give a little bit of background on this session and what it is that we will explore in the next 50 minutes or so.
Thank you very much, Sandy. The idea was to put together an event between the 2 local networks to discuss open science and reproducibility when it comes to qualitative research. As you know, probably regarding quantitative research, there is an increasing trend to make quantitative research more reproducible, open, and transparent through, for instance, pre-registration, pre-analysis plan. But there is also a recent trend also making qualitative research more open. However, when it comes to qualitative research, is natural to start wondering to what extent we can reproduce qualitative research, or does it make sense to reproduce qualitative research, or whether other factors, considerations are relevant for making qualitative research open and transparent. And these are the questions we're going to prompt our speaker today. And then we will have also a space for questions. Thank you very much, and I'll pass it back to you.
Okay, great. Well, then it's time to open the panel. And yeah, the way we organize this is that every speaker has 5 minutes, which sounds like a very short amount of time. In those 5 minutes, they will share with us what kind of work they do, and they will then reflect on their open research practices and also share their thoughts on reproducibility in the context of qualitative research, discussing also, how they practice, for instance, open data sharing or pre-registration. They had some prompts in advance, but don't worry if you don't stick to those in detail or if you add other points. We will block section for questions in the end. So that way we also make sure we will hear from every speaker within the time that we have. So people online, if you have questions that come up as someone is speaking, just put them in the chat. Matteo will keep an eye on it. And yeah, once everyone has shared their position statement, we'll open up the floor for questions here and also online. So then without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce to you our first panelist, Kirsty Wallace. Kirsty Wallace is here with two hats on, and she is allowed to wear both of them. So she asked that before if she can wear both hats. So Kirsty is actually UCL's research liaison officer at the Office for Open Science and Scholarship, but she's also a PhD student who has just finished, I think, her data collection in the middle of analyzing her qualitative data. And so I think she will share with us her views from, yeah, the sort of open science ideal practice scenario, but also what the real world of doing qualitative research looks like. And yeah, look forward to hearing your views on reproducibility and qualitative research. Thank you, Kirsty.
Thank you very much. I hope that I can be heard online if I don't lean forward, because that's going to be a bit weird. But online people, if you can't hear me, just shout, someone's watching. So yeah, as Sandy said, I'm here with two completely separate hats on. I look after the UCL Office for Open Science and Scholarship. So on that side of things, I actually have an all advocacy all the time, all openness all the time type of approach. So it's something that personally, it's something that I truly believe in, but it is also my job to advocate and support people to make things open. But on the other hand, I am also a PhD student. I'm a PhD student in the Department of Information Studies at UCL. And so I'm doing a qualitative study of research support librarians. So yes, I am researching my own job. And essentially what I'm looking at is how their roles have changed over time. So it's a very subjective thing that I'm looking to do. So one of the questions we were asked to address is reproducibility a key concern in the research that I'm doing? And if I'm honest, the key concern is, how the hell do I do a PhD? But I will say that reproducibility is a thing that is in the background quite a lot. So it's in the back of my mind, trying to figure out, you know, how can I do this the best way possible? Because my research is not reproducible because of the nature of what it is. So the bulk of it relies on semi-structured interviews, and also my analysis method is very subjective. It's based on my experiences doing the job that I do. And so, yes, I can ask the same question and I could go back and interview the same person again. But because of the way that it's been done, depending on how much caffeine they've had between each iteration, they're going to say something different. So it's not reproducible, there's no way. But the thing that I am trying to do is, rather than being reproducible, I'm going to be as transparent as humanly possible. So while I cannot give enough that people can reproduce the exact method, you can't do chemical A plus chemical B equals chemical C, but I can share all of my my outlines, my interview plan. I can share my codes and the information about what they mean to me and how I got there, so that someone can do the same thing again and hopefully reproduce the results, or at least the assertions that I'm making from those results. And so that's how it applies to my research. So reproducibility, no, but kinda. So another thing we were asked to talk about in our little 5 minutes was about the why of all this. Why is reproducibility important? Why is openness important? And so reproducibility is an important part of openness, but I think that in the context of qualitative research, it's often more helpful to think of openness in a more holistic way, and actually think of not what you can't do, but what you can do. You can't open everything up because you're working with people. You might have personal data. There's a lot of concerns there. But while you can't do that, you can share your data. You can share your code books. You can share your interview plans, anything like that. You can also share software, code. There's so much that you can do. So I think that's what we need to do. And, you know, putting my advocate for this for a job hat on, there are also the tangible benefits of actually doing this. So beyond it's a really nice thing to do, there are also tangible benefits. There's additional citations, there is additional reach, so your research goes further, more people can access it. You can also get your research to more people that might want to collaborate with you. You can build your networks, and it also allows people from around the world and also your participants to access the research that they were a part of, and that's something. Sandy.
Thank you so much. Great. And yeah, I think these were some really important points. Now, I have to say, for transparency, I'm not a qualitative researcher. So I actually am also here listening to your statements and thinking, oh, what can that teach us about those of us who are more quanties? And I think there are probably actually quite a lot of parallels in the sense that also with quantitative studies, not, as we know, a lot of it is not reproducible, actually, but that focusing on transparency and actually, you know, writing, for instance, methodology sections that are truly detailed and so transparent that people at least have a recipe to attempt to reproduce the work. That is already something that, yeah, could add to the openness as well. So thank you so much. And we'll then move on, and thank you also for keeping to the time perfectly. We'll then move on to our second panelist, Dr. Anja Prosser. She's an assistant professor at the Center for Business, Organization and Society at University of Bath. And yeah, also look forward to hearing your position statement on qualitative research and open science.
Great. Okay. Is the audio all right?
Yep. So yeah,
I mean, it is awkward, right? Okay, no pressure. That was excellent. So I feel very stressed about following on from that already. I've written loads of stuff down. Yep. So I'm Anaya. So I'm an assistant professor currently working within marketing, business and society alongside environmental social science, psychology. I wear a lot of hats. And I'm also a meta researcher, so I'm really interested in sort of the philosophy of science and how we do science, like the kind of mechanics of how things work. So in terms of what I do, I'm an assistant professor, so part of my role is teaching and part of my role is research. So I have the excellent job of trying to teach marketing students data ethics. So that is a challenge, and we can maybe chat afterwards about the challenges of teaching the students as well. So in terms of the questions we were asked, I think is reproducibility something I value? Again, I think you're right, like it depends on the kind of research I'm doing. So I do mixed methods scholarship, so some of my studies are experimental or surveys, and other studies that I do are way more qualitative, way more interpretive. So I've done focus groups where I've taken the moderator completely out of the room to kind of just let the conversation happen. I've done fieldwork interviews, and I'm also moving into ethnography. So I've spanned a lot of different methodologies. And I think the crux of probably what we will get into today is that the values of our research really needs to match the epistemology and the methodology and what we're hoping to achieve with the research. So when it comes to quantitative work, for example, quantitative work that informs environmental policy, yes, you do want that to be kind of broadly generalizable and broadly reproducible. But the other kind of work I do, the more interpretive work, might be people's experiences of transformative experiences at a festival, something which is so personal and so unique to the context. And we don't want to take that uniqueness away from the context. And we wouldn't expect that someone could come along next year and find exactly the same thing as me, or someone could come along to a slightly different context and find the same thing. So for my quantitative work, yes, I do value reproducibility insofar as it allows me to make assertions about what my work can or can't do. But for my qualitative work, it's a little bit more complex. And at the moment, I'm working on a paper exploring how management and organization studies scholars see sort of drives towards open science. And the qualitative folks are really rightly concerned about what we've called positivism creep. So the idea that the epistemology that drives a lot of quantitative work is sort of encroaching on qualitative territory without fully understanding the nuances of qualitative territory. And now there is also positivist qualitative research. So if you're doing content analysis, you may be aiming for reproducibility there. So there are so many, so many nuances. And I think what this whole conversation tells us is that we really need to get to grips with the kind of epistemologies we're working with, the goals of our work. So for me, when I think about openness outside of reproducibility, I think about moving from kind of dominant logics in science to alternative orientation. This is sort of a teaser for the preprint that will hopefully be coming out later this month if I can get my stuff together. So I see a sort of narrative of scarcity in science, and I think we need to open that up and see our work as more abundant. I think more people should be able to access our work. In the survey that we did, open access publication was the least controversial thing. Most scientists and researchers support open access publication, and the journal system as we have it is not good. But that's something that we can do. So we can move, and in terms of opening my data, I also see that as sort of, when appropriate and ethical, of course, a way for me to move away from the scarcity of going, this is my data, to the abundance of, this is what my participants have shared with me, this is what I'm able to share with everyone else. So I think it really depends on what kind of things we're aiming for as researchers. And I think a lot of my qualitative openness comes from the perspective of trying to help my research build something for other people in the future. So if I'm opening up things about my process, it's not necessarily because I'm hoping that people will reproduce that process. It's so that people can learn from what I've done, learn about the constraints of the knowledge I've created from that, and maybe do something else. So that's sort of delving into transferability, which is also controversial in quantitative research. So I think with all of those controversies, I'll stop there and let the rest of the panelists decide. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was great. And I feel like this was also what we can plug here, because you spoke about open access and, you know, that journals, and that could be a whole session for itself. But I do want to plug, you sit under the UCL Press logo there. So UCL Press is open access phonograph publisher. So just there, I know LSE Press also. Oh, apologies. LSE Press as well, so you can choose. But important, both of them are open access, and yeah, so keep that in mind for everyone who's looking published, edited collection, or yeah, a monograph as well, to make that accessible to the world. But yeah, thank you so much. Great points there, and we'll explore what you mentioned also in terms of how we can teach that. Actually, I think that's a really important point. Hopefully we'll have some time in the Q&A part, but for now, we move on to our first panelist, Dr. Matthew Hanchard. He had also a slightly longer journey this morning, so thank you so much for joining us here in London. He's a research fellow at the School of Sociological Studies, Politics, and International Relations at the University of Sheffield. Thank you so much, Matthew, and look forward to your position statement.
So I'm a sociologist, but I'm really a science and technologies studies scholar. Unashamedly a constructivist, so I come from a factive theory background. So think Elizabeth Shode, Pierre Bourdieu, Anthony Giddens. Where my understanding of open research comes in, I have 7 projects, pre-doc and post-doc, and I've always sought to be an open researcher. So that's a project with 200 interviews, elicitation workshops. I've harvested social media data and conducted analysis on these, surveys through to ethnography. And what's really sort of brought me into open science was I was at a conference. There was a talk about the Office for Science and Technology policy and their mandate. The last mandate was in 2013, and they told the NIH, which is the National Institutes of Health, that all of their publications with publicly funded money must be made open access, or they would withhold funding. we followed suit in Europe with Coalition S. Most of the funders here from UKRI, Welcome. Most funders in Europe did the same. The World Health Organization in 2021 followed suit. We're at a point where publications now, you look at RLX, who are sort of Elsevier and RX Data, they made £2.7 billion in 1 year in adjusted operating profit. And if you look at the top 10 academic publishers, 38.7 billion of revenue. So there's a sense of extraction there of academic labour. But you compare AstraZeneca, only made 4 billion in 2021 globally in profits from the COVID vaccine. You realise 2/3 of that just on academic publications, really. So 2024, the OSTP came out with another mandate that open researchers' data must be made open access. As a qualitative researcher, I was aghast. What am I going to do? I've got to make my data open. How can I do that with an ethnography? How can I do that with social media? So I ran off, got some funding, started a small project, and looked into other researchers' perspectives on that. And I wanted to have a sort of encompassing project. A lot of the work on this that I did with Itzel Sandra Manpanida, who sadly isn't here today, covered that. Got a publication coming out. But since then, we've seen that that mandate is being put into place, or was before JD Vance ripped up the NIH. Coalition S, Open Science Foundation, Barcelona Declaration, we are moving that way. Data is going to be open. But it's not necessarily bad intention. Openness is an ideal. So for me, you think of the original purpose of openness was peer review, philosophical transactions, 1665. The idea was to be able to put something into practice by others. So it was very much about reproducibility. You think Karl Popper, LSE, Karl Popper, post-World War II, it's about openness and participation against totalitarianism. It was an ideological stance. It was a particular notion of falsifiability, so falsification. Then you think Robert Merton, at the same time, New York, middle range theories. It had to be empirically driven, but it also had to be generalizable. So our notion of reproducibility really is that it's generalizable and it's open to all. Doesn't always sit well if you think about private companies. So it's actually tied to a very strict Judeo-Christian idea of revelation, individualism and free agency. It's not well suited to collectivist cultures. If I think of China, or notions of shared humanity. If I think of Ubuntu or Ubuntu in West Africa, it's quite colonial, it's quite pathologizing in many ways. But it is hard baked into how we imagine and configure science, sociologically, politically, economically, technologically. I think from the Truman administration onwards, states funded basic research, the market's taken that forward to application, paid back tax. It's a cycle. Trouble with that, got commercially sensitive data that can't be made open, and you've also got, at the moment, after a massive turn to neoliberalism, universities are grabbing data, hoarding that IP, not sharing it with others. Which is, where I work in pharma at the minute, I see this left, right, and centre. We do not share our clinical data, even though it's publicly funded. And we have monopoly capitalism emerging around that. At the same time, we've got new tech like AI disrupt notions of what reproducibility could mean. How can we replicate an AI data set or synthetically produced data set that is derivative of the original? We can't necessarily. So I don't think in its current form, reproducibility should be an aim for qualitative research. I use the term re-rendering, but really it's a refiguring of reproducibility. And I will say that UKRN have done a fantastic job at rewording their terminology around reproducibility. And we are seeing this shift taking place, the softening away from generalizability. So what I think we should do is really be, and I agree, telling the story of the story. So I use the term re-rendering. For qualitative, it's about making your claims plausible. Your knowledge claims need to be plausible and understandable. You're not trying to reach the same conclusion. You're trying to understand how an interpretation has been made, how a social phenomenon has been rendered. That requires sort of reflective detail on the context. You can't disentangle a researcher from context in an ethnography. It's embedded in who they are. That can be social, political, economic, geographic. You need a statement on positionality, and that needs to be live. That can change throughout the process of research. You need a narrative on how your thoughts and analysis have changed. So you might pre-register, but it's not a final conclusion or hypothesis. It's your starting point. You're saying, I'm pre-registering this research. I'm going to map how I've changed and how the research has changed throughout. But also, if you happen to change your subject action research. But you need detail on that rendering, and it does need to be updatable. So it's a living document. Of course, there is a bit of sidestep. So disentangling researcher from context can be a bit tricky. You're often relying on memory. You're often relying on experience that can't necessarily be articulated, even with any ease. But you also need to open space for indigenous ways of knowing and doing that are not necessarily readily amenable to storage in the way that our data structures are. There's work ongoing around that. We need to be open to effective emotional research, transformative experiences. We need to understand that research isn't always about an artifact. Research can be a process, an end unto itself. And it can also generate intrinsic value. So a recital or something that has a value that can't necessarily be quantified, directly articulated. An opera performance, for example. How on earth would you reproduce that? The quality. So it's a reflexive re-rendering. It's a storying of the story. But I'm still not sold on how we reconfigure that, or how we can configure that with participatory and co-produced modes of knowledge, but also with some of the data politics within academia. So an early career researcher and a PhD student, they're not employees directly on a fixed term contract. So only when you have a permanent contract in most institutions that your data becomes the IP of the research organisation. If you're a student, that's not necessarily true. In that case, you might want to go to your next job, keep that data so that you can use it again, not open it up. So there are a lot of data politics issues around that. But for me, no, I think we need to refigure reproducibility for politics.
Thank you so much. I like the re-rendering, yeah, not re-rendering. I think that's great. And again, a few points that you mentioned actually are really valuable for quantitative scholars as well. To circle back, especially pre-registrations as a living document. I think that's a lot more sort of, yeah, representing the reality of doing research. And on the Open Science Framework, you can actually now update pre-registration, which initially wasn't possible. And I think that is also just recognize the fact that being transparent about your story and how you walk through your research landscape, actually, that is what we're trying to achieve. Yeah, so great, fantastic. Look forward to the publication coming out as well. And with that, we come to our final panelist. I realized we did actually a really good job putting together a quite interdisciplinary panel. So we will now conclude with Dr. Madeline Pownall. She's an associate professor at the School of Psychology. And yeah, so we now have psychologists in the room. And I think for a lot of people, the open science revolution, or however we want to label it, sort of started in the field of especially social psychology. And you mentioned that's actually your original background as well.
Yeah.
So pleased to have you here as a qualitative scholar now, or yeah, hearing your views on qualitative research and open. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I got the benefit of going last, which means I can like tick off all the things I was going to say and then like be left with everything at the end. Yeah, so should reproducibility be the aim of qualitative research? No, I don't think it should. I think I'm going to focus specifically on the idea of reproducibility of like analyses, like of findings, because I think that's the thing that I've been thinking a lot about, because I think people have kind of covered reproducibility of method, reproducibility of research context, and I'm going to focus specifically on this idea of, if I run a study, collect some data, and say that I found a thing in the data, should it be the standard that somebody else can take that same qualitative data and expect to find the same thing? I think fundamentally, this is one of my big concerns with open research, which is what I would consider to be the misapplication of quantitative standards to qualitative research. And that's one of my big concerns, because I think that what's been happening in psychology over the past kind of 10, 15 years is there has been so much kind of quick response to what do we do about questionable research practices that are essentially quantitative questionable research practices, p-hacking, hypothesizing after results are known, data fishing, all of this stuff. And there has been this kind of blanket advocacy for some of these tools like open data in the spirit of trying to improve reproducibility. And what I've kind of observed is happening now is the qualitative researchers are now being encouraged to try and fit these new quote unquote standards. And it concerns me, similar to what the other panelists have articulated really beautifully, it concerns me that that is not an epistemologically appropriate standard. And one of the reasons it concerns me is that one of the kind of hallmarks of really good qualitative research, particularly when you're coming from a kind of interpretist, constructionist epistemology, is that who you are as a researcher, your positionality, shapes and guides and influences how you handle and analyze and view the data. And that kind of fact isn't necessarily a bias that should be stamped out in any way possible. That is what makes this research human. That's what makes the research good. And our positionality is an analytical resource, as Brown and Clark refer to it. And I think that if we take our positionality as researchers is an analytical resource, who is a way of making our analysis better, then I think then advocating for reproducibility as just blankets, the idea that you should see in the data what I see in the data, I think is not aligned with what that kind of qualitative research is trying to do. So I think sometimes students will say, oh, can you check my qualitative analysis to check that you can corroborate it? And I'm like, babe, if you found that, let's talk about it, and let's talk about process and standard of transparency. But if you cannot leave yourself at the door when it comes to the analysis, you will see things through a certain lens and through a certain view. And I think that is the beauty and the rigor of dealing with qualitative data. So I think, no, I don't think it should be the aim, but also I think that this is part of a bigger thing about trying to resist some of the kind of standards for rigor or quality. I don't like quality, rigor and quality, that has come from quantitative traditions that is now being, I think, quite sloppily applied to all methods with these mandates in a way that I think is epistemologically and methodologically and ontologically and ethically inappropriate. Would you like me? I don't think that was very long.
I mean, it was a great point to end on, but almost like a manifesto, I think that we are writing here. But you know what we can do? We start the Q&A, and then you can just feed in any additional insights and questions. And yeah, but thank you also to you. And yeah, I learned a lot. So I hope everyone here in the room and online also enjoyed this first segment of the event. So we have actually a good amount of time for Q&A. So is there something online? Okay, so we'll just kind of go back and forth. Let's start with a question online, and then and of course also the other panelists can also ask questions. So well, let's go with it.
Thank you to the panelists. There is a question online from Joanne, a PhD student from the University of Birmingham, but based in South Korea. And the question is for all the speakers. Given the transdisciplinarity path that many institutions are striving for, what suggestion do you have for the conversations or processes for quantitative, qualitative projects, or quantitative and qualitative projects? Anyone?
think I kind of missed the question.
Yeah,
sorry.
can you repeat it?
Yeah. Given the transdisciplinarity path that many institutions are striving for, what suggestions do you have for the conversations or processes for quantitative, qualitative research projects?
I mean, I can start because I am the qualitative rep for Bart's Open Research Steering Group. So I'm seeing some of these conversations. I mean, my main recommendation is like start having conversations because so often it's psychology going off and doing their own thing and doing their world leading, referable research, and everyone else going like, oh, there's stuff happening over there, it's not relevant to us. And then there's often people, and I think the panelists, we're all these kind of people who sit within different disciplines who end up needing to find the most convincing way to convince people within our discipline that this is something you should care about. And that's largely by doing workshops like this, writing papers, doing talks. And I think it's great, but there's probably a huge duplication of effort going on. And I just think that those conversations need to be happening a little bit more organically and need to be led by leaders within disciplines and institutions. And there are a lot of people, particularly at the more senior level, who are tenured, who have been in their position for a while and are really resistant and reluctant to anything apart from the status quo. And I don't think it should be on early career folks to push that. Like I've certainly, during my PhD, some of the audience may have had these experiences. I did my PhD during the kind of replication crisis, and for me I was reading this stuff and then I was the one kind of informing my supervisors what to do, and that was really challenging for me because not only was I trying to learn how to do research, I was also trying to influence more senior folks who saw that as a threat to their authority. It was awful. So if any senior folks are in the room or people across different disciplines are in the room and those conversations aren't happening, I think it's on all of us to start those discussions. I don't know if that answers the question, but if anyone else needs to.
Yeah, I think to jump in a little bit, then I think that there's also, I've realized quite late the power of having these interdisciplinary conversations. Because I remember there was a session about education technology, and I did what I thought was a very controversial hot take back, and it was a few years ago, where I was like, reflexivity really matters, and I think that positionality matters. And there were these group of sociologists who do autoethnography, and they were like, yeah. And they were like, that's what we know. And I think, and so then it kind of introduced me to I was looking over here in the literature, but there's this thing and I think that sometimes, I see these kind of siloed efforts Anaya is talking about, that actually if we're talking about how do we improve research, that some disciplines have really got things sussed out, and so it's about learning from other disciplines as well as trying to do change in disciplines as well.
I think there was something really valuable for getting out of your box. And even so, the question asked here is a PhD student, so even just getting involved in interdisciplinary conversations. So for sure, something like the reproducibility thing, you are talking to people that are not in your silo about them, and that's where you get access to those broader conversations and those, actually people over there are doing this thing already. So it's great thing. It's step outside that box that you're within.
I have a bit of a tricky one. Coming from an STS background, it was already transdisciplinary, so I kind of find it hard to see the barriers in the same way, or the siloing, because there's so much work that has come before me to dismantle that. But I mean, I would say it's not just about joining networks, but it's also about doing. But also, I'm speaking to research data manager. They actually have quite a lot of understanding of the ethics and debates, not just the process.
Yeah, I was going to add the library teams are doing God's work. I'm not they're amazing. But it was something I wasn't really aware of until I started doing this kind of meta research work. Librarians know everything. I'm convinced. Shout to your librarian.
I'm glad someone said that wasn't me.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, great, fantastic. Is there a question here in the room? Yes.
Morning. Thank you for some very interesting thoughts. And I have a question that's long, but I was thinking that like many of you interpreted like producibility more for being like transparency or kind of justifying your decisions and how you did your research rather than the aim of being rather than the aim being replication as in somebody else being able to do their own version of study and getting the same results. But then like with this kind of maybe diluted conception of reproducibility or something, I was wondering how you would defend kind of the accusation coming from many quantitative researchers because like I'm from more of a quant background myself and I've seen people kind of discrediting qualitative research as not being scientific or robust enough because maybe because it's not reproducible because they can't see what's going on, they don't understand. I don't know. So like how do you kind of push back against the idea that like and kind of establish that qualitative research still has robust insights by not being reproducible in the same way?
I think that's such a good question. And I think, and I completely recognize all the stuff that you're saying about, well, if scientificness means reproducibility and we're saying that reproducible, then how do you deal with that? I think that the definition of rigor and the definition of what it means to be scientific and do good work that I like is that your methods and your decisions allow you to answer the research question that you set. And I think if the research question that you've set, if the parameters of that research question is to understand this sample and understand these people's lived experiences, full stop, without the view to create something generalizable, without the goal to, you're not trying to understand patterns of behavior that can be applied to all people. You're interested in this group and their experience in that sample. Then I think then if your methods, whether they be reproducible or not, and your analysis, I think if your methods and analysis and choices allows you to answer that research question well, that to me is rigor, and that's science, that's doing good work. So I think that there's what I'd really like to see is open research and open science conversations having a much broader view of what it means to do rigorous research, and also a much broader view of what it means to do scientific research that acknowledges that there is place for all of these different ways of asking questions. Yeah, that was. Let's go.
Well, just quickly, because I feel like you should have a lot to say about it. Like STS has a lot to say about about all of this, so I won't take too long. But to kind of I think we really need to be interrogating what being a science or being scientific gives us or offers us that being a researcher doesn't. And I think like the political use of like science is absolutely fascinating, and like Trump's recent executive order on gold standard science, right? Like so I encounter a lot of people. I mean, I think it depends on your discipline, because in psychology, the qualitative folks that I speak to over there seem more comfortable using science as a label for their work, but as you sort of go more sort of sociological, I find there's a lot more reticence. And I don't know, like, I think I've kind of changed. I used to refer to myself as an environmental social scientist, and now I'm like, science though? I don't know. Like, but what does STS have to say about a lot, right?
It depends on your notion of science. I think of the Wissenschaft, the wider notion of what science is. A lot of people think of the scientific method, like falsifiability, and it's great. We've brick upon brick, brick upon brick. We've built lovely walls till they come crumbling down. The paradigm shifts. But that's how science works or has done. But I think at the minute we're at a really interesting point of change. So NICE, for example, National Institute of Clinical Excellence, have sought to have a more permissive regulatory approach to medicine that allow in clinical trials a single arm study along with real world evidence. What that means is you don't have to have replicable quantitative data sets from blood tissues made into tabulated data that's quantifiable. Instead, you can have some analysis of social media, but also people's experiences. So actually quality of life metrics come to the fore. We're looking not just at measures that are quantifiable as metrics, but in terms of personal experience, especially in areas like rare cancer, rare disease, a very small sample, you can't run a big clinical trial. You're interested in qualitative experience and the impact this drug has had on somebody's everyday life. And I think because that's such a profitable area of medicine, we're seeing AI being used within this space in a qualitative context. And I think that's shifting away from this quantitative dominance within science, which I think we're on the precipice of that starting to crumble, if I'm honest. I think fonts have had their day. It's a useful approach, but it's not the only approach.
I think just a tiny bit to add to that, just reflecting what Madeline was saying and bringing in something that Matthew said earlier about co-production, science research. I think there's something really important to be said about the goal of the research. And actually, if you are doing something like co-production research or citizen science, so that's something I do a lot in my day job, work is supporting citizen scientists, and the research outcome is a byproduct of working with communities to learn something or improve something about their environment. So, you know, these citizen scientists go out and they do work with kids in schools. Kids learn about, you know, pollution, and they have some data, but actually what they're trying to do is gather information to make their lives better. And that's the goal. That's the goal of the research. The data is kind of a side effect of the purpose of that activity is to support that community. And I think that's a really important thing to take back into those conversations. It's actually, sometimes we're not trying to change the world. We are actually trying to change one very small community's position in it. And that's something you can go back to as part of those conversations as well.
Thank you. I just going to add something which is unrelated, but I think important to say that, you know, just because a study shares data is pre-registered doesn't mean it's rigorous and good. And I'm really concerned about, you know, journals that give these open science badges, where it's almost, you know, like military stars on the shoulder. So you can have a paper which has 4 badges, and then you think, oh my God, this must be amazing. It can still be bad research. It can still be an irrelevant research question. So I think, yeah, we should be careful to not confuse or what is rigor, and definitely not confuse it with having multiple open science practices picked up. Great. We have one more question online from Nick, Open Research Advisor at the University of Leeds. Oh, you yeah, there was a wave. So the question is, I'm concerned that library professionals and universities can perhaps contribute to the misapplication of quant principles wall. How does the panel think that can be mitigated? And then there's an addendum, partly through translating funder mandate. So I imagine the addendum is how, library professionals may contribute to any sounds like they should have.
To be honest, I think that there is a point there, because a lot of library professionals are just interpreting on behalf of researchers, and a lot of them do not have PhDs. They have not done research work. So I think actually it's kind of similar to the previous question that we had online about, you know, how do we learn? Talk to each other. So one of the things that the work of the office at UCL has done is kind of, like, we have committees full of academics that tell us what the issues are, and we also get involved in events like this and stuff like that. So I think there is a responsibility of those library professionals, but I think also as a library professional, I would advocate for everyone here, if we're saying something stupid, tell us, because we're never going to learn otherwise. Yeah. So I think it is really important that it's a conversation, because we talked about silos in the academic framework. The libraries are also a silo. You know, we only know what we know, so it does need to be a conversation. So we take steps to learn as much as we can, but there is a limit to it, because, you know, we have to keep not just one set of policies in our heads, we have to keep all of them. And sometimes, you know, they get mixed up or you use the wrong language. You know, it needs to be a conversation and you need to learn. So, yeah, absolutely.
Great. I think we have time for one more question in the room. Yes, go for it.
So yeah, I'm Rosie April, Research Services Manager at the I'm picking up on Nick's question and some things that Matthew was talking about earlier about the funders. And as a librarian and a researcher, one of the things that I think is quite challenging is that reproducibility it produces a single standard that people are aiming for, and it's not always simple. The badges don't work, and we know that, and that people can do the right things, and it's still not good research, but there is a standard that people are aiming for. And one of the challenges that I think librarians in particular face is that when we're trying to advise qualitative researchers on sort of issues around open research or transparency, the what you should be sharing question is not simple. And so trying to give sort of institutional level advice is difficult. So I'm just wondering whether the panelists have any thought on how we navigate that to kind of have broader messages around what open qualitative research looks like without losing all meaning.
Advocate for funding and staff.
Yeah.
I think I don't think we have all the answers as well. Like because like Anaya and I have been running these. I'll be really quick. We've been running these like events recently where we've got these huge numbers of qualitative researchers, and we've literally just been saying, can we please just have a bit of a think about what this might look like? And I think we're having a bit of a think because we don't know. And I think that so maybe it is a bit of a thing of like maybe we're not ready for institution level policy. Maybe it's like do you know what? There's all of the really good work for quant stuff. We're not actually quite sure how this is best done for qualitative work. So maybe there isn't yet the evidence base and the thought, and that I'm sure there are tools that are useful. I just don't think we maybe have them yet. Maybe it's a bit premature for that, Mabes.
So
Yeah.
I'll also be quick. I have a couple of papers looking at open data mandates and policies and stuff like that. So check out my paper. But one of those papers encourages people to look beyond a mandate, because potentially opening all of your data because of a mandate can actually be the least ethical thing to do. So if you need reference, like oftentimes this is just about connecting with other people or finding the right references to be able to like put a case forward. But I think it's ultimately a collective action problem. Like I don't think we should have mandates that are inappropriate for certain fields being applied, and there needs to be pressure on funders and institutions if there are mandates that are inappropriate. Like, yeah, and there needs to be that conversation across the institution and that critical mass, which everyone here can kind of contribute to.
Yeah. I think that's a great final statement for this session. It definitely could have been at least twice as long, but we thank everyone online. I think we answered most of the questions. And yeah, thank you to everyone here in the room. If you want to attend more festival sessions, oh, it's gone again. Was quickly there. Check out the QR code. For those online, I think, yeah, all the remaining sessions are available online as well, right? Yes, so you can join us too. And yeah, if you could please also fill in this brief feedback survey, we would be very happy to know what we can improve maybe next year's. I just say
Essentially, if you like it being a festival, tell us so that we'll do it again.
yes, there we go.
And which we have.
Yeah, so and once more, thank you to our panelists for coming all the way to London. And open research, everyone. Open it. However open you want it to.
One of them's reflection. Yeah. Sorry. One of them's reflection. And then the other one is
Oh, but
oh, cool.
That was so good.
I'm so proud of that. That was so good. like this in my project. Yeah. I mean, back and forth. When I read that. Oh, great. Oh, okay. All right. Sure, advice. Well, I sort of the journal. Yes. I'm coming.
Yeah, I was interested in real yesterday. That's all they use. Kind of what we have.
Yeah, the same. I managed to email about.
Yeah.